And so, yet another introduction, should I say, into the hidden history of the African American fighting man. You know, it was on this day, folks, back in 1849, just before the Civil War, about 10 years or so. Harriet Tubman escaped enslavement there in Maryland. She had a very, very, should I say, horrible master, if there's such a thing as a nice one. You do understand, America, that to enslave an individual and get them to do something against their will, the only way you maintain that is the threat of death. You do understand that. You do understand that if, in fact, a horse doesn't go the way you want it, or a dog doesn't do what a dog should do for you, then there's no sense in having it. Theoretically, you get rid of it. Just want to make sure you understand the dynamics of master to enslaved. No one does something against their will unless they are fearful of being killed. And let me just tell you, Harriet Tubman was one of those individuals. Very rugged woman, even though she was enslaved, fit for the fields, to say the least, and had been in the fields all her life. She escaped that, and she used every means necessary to do so. However, upon escaping enslavement, this brave woman went back some 19 times to bring out more than 300 enslaved Americans who wanted to get the heck out of there. You got to understand, she was in Maryland, very close to Washington, D.C. Now you should know that there are some who don't understand the dynamics of the South. Just go to Prince George's County, and then you'll understand what I'm saying. But she became, ladies and gentlemen, not only a spy, and not only the conductor on the Underground Railroad, but she became a, Army recruit. She did. An advisor, and was led the way in several skirmishes there with the Confederate forces, to which she later on received a pension as a result of her efforts. So you should know. All right, let's get to this, folks. With that said, I've always known, since I was reared here in Mississippi, by a father and mother who have always told me that there's a battle going on. I don't know whether young people are still being told that on the African American side. If not, then they should be. And the battle is about right and wrong. It is not an ethnic battle. There is still a battle here in Mississippi about what's right, what's wrong. And there are some, I don't doubt, given those who have been adamantly for maintaining the Confederate existence, there are some, ladies and gentlemen, who are indoctrinated to believe that they are right in their quest to hold up the bygone, or the concept that they are better. In other words, that there are people in Mississippi who are not deserving of the same thing that everyone else is deserving of, and that is protection in the Constitution. There are people who believe that. Those are the people I do battle with every day. And they make themselves very visible to me and audible, and some, well, most of them are cowards. You know, they'll send a little note here, make a phone call there, you know. The usual, you know, blow the horn, throw the bird, that kind of stuff. Just, no mano a mano kind of. You won't have that. You know, it's throw the brick, hide the hand, that kind of stuff. But it is still a battle. I'm not angry about it. I'm not disappointed about it. I'm not even sad. But every morning when I come here and I do this broadcast, you can better believe I'm prepared. You see, I've been reared by Sandy and Elmanette Daniels, and they reared me to be able to be one of the first to integrate schools. And this is something that maybe you guys have not heard, and if you don't mind, I'll get to the national stuff, but you need to hear this, especially some of my Caucasian listeners. Let me just explain to you what you're dealing with when you deal with a Mississippi Negro like Rip Daniels. You see, very early on during the segregated years, there were meetings. Typically, it would be in and around either Nichols High, Perkins, or once I moved over to Gulfport, there were meetings in the KP Hall, Knights of Pythos. Well, it's the Knights of KP. Yeah, that's it, Knights of Pythos. Right there on Riley Avenue and Tea Garden Road, there were meetings being held by what one would call those individuals who were seeking to not only get rid of segregation, but more importantly, to eliminate the double standards that had been placed upon them by the selected class, basically white supremacists. So there was a fight. I was in the midst, very young boy. We're talking, I was 9, 10 years old. My mind was grabbing me by the hand and taking me to First Missionary Baptist Church right there in Biloxi. Actually, I was 6 years old there. Went to Perkins Elementary, right there by the railroad track. Reverend Holloway was, in fact, the pastor there. This is after that church had been burned down and rebuilt. So, you got to understand, I grew up in that. Before turning 9, 10 years old, I'd seen, 3 buildings burned out. Dr. Gibbert R. Mason's office, Joe Austin's, and had listened to Mom and Dad talk about other churches from Little Rock Baptist to Mount Bethel to First Missionary being burned suspiciously. Around the same time, I might add. Before I was born, I might add. So, integration came along. We're talking 1960s, right? And so, for my Caucasian listeners out there, let me just explain to you the meetings, how the meetings would take place. And it's okay. The Sovereignty Commission certainly knew about it because they had their spies, no doubt. So I would go to the meeting, and then the meeting would be held. You'd probably have someone like Miss Grace Lombard, the mother of my producer emeritus, Judy, who you will hear on this show periodically. Her mother, whose name, by the way, was on the Sovereignty Commission files, along with people like Dr. Gibbert R. Mason, or Mr. Galloway, who's now deceased, lived on Nixon Street, was my neighbor. Mr. Joe Austin, who had no children, but certainly was the one that would put out the leaflets, which is why his printing press was bombed. You might have Mr. Hoskins from over in Gaston Point, who's now deceased, was a cement finisher and a contractor who supported with both his hands, strong hands, and his money. Reverend Geis, all of the pastors would participate. And so you'd have these adults in there, and then my parents would bring me and others. Judy's mom would bring her. And their discussion is what children was going to go to the segregated school. Who was going to be the first? Now you got to understand the environment here. This is during the time when you had, the Central Park, the Central City, the Arkansas 9 that happened in the late 1950s. There's 9 children being escorted, and of course you had Chalmette integration. Yeah, Little Rock 9, thank you. And then you had, the little girl there in Chalmette, Louisiana. You had stuff happening. Of course, in and around the same time, you had George Wallace, live and well, saying that there's not going to be integration there. Here you have these African-American parents planning to send their little bundles of joy to a school that didn't want them. Man, I look back on that and I say to myself, but what they did was they prepared us from day one. They prepared us for one most important thing, and that was to not have any fear. I was ready to not have one fear of not one person that was white, just because he was white. In other words, there was no pigment paranoia, if you get my drift. That doesn't mean there was anger. There's no anger. I had Caucasians on my street, and we came to play when I was very, very young. On the same token, when I was in Biloxi and by Augusta, we would throw rocks at them on the railroad track, or across the pipes that was right behind the cesspool there and by Augusta Projects. And it was always this old battle going on. But there was no fear. And at the same token, there was no expectation of being liked. I didn't measure myself by that. And the people, the adults in that class, in that meeting, they told us, well, you're not going to be liked. And here is what you must do. You've got to make the grade. You've got to be better. And you better go there and not get hurt and make yourself back here. You've got to listen to the teacher and do what she says, no matter if it's something that is wrong. And by the way, I had a lot of Caucasian teachers who told me things that were wrong now. Even one that never called on me. It's okay. Let me tell you why it's okay. Because you see, those adults who sit in that room with us prepared us for the battle that we had to have. And it wasn't just with little Caucasian kids. It wasn't just with, quote-unquote, the white boys. It was the concept that we were lesser and therefore not deserving of what was equitable. You got me? The one thing they did tell imply, though, was that all Caucasians were smart. That was very, very, they just didn't know, I guess because it wasn't integration. They knew they would, my mom knew she was keeping little Caucasian kids who were dumb as hell. But they led us to believe that somehow or another we had, we got this great competition. It wasn't, please. We didn't even have good books in segregated schools, but trust me, we came there overly prepared. There's no doubt about that. They had the better books. Just didn't read them. And I'm not saying all, but most. But I want to get to the point. The point is that as a young African-American kid, I was expected to go to a place that didn't want me by adults who didn't want me there. And in some cases, the trip there was as challenging as getting to the school because there were adults waiting at the school bus singing the same song, 2468. We don't want to integrate. I never forget it. Mr. Woodrow, the bus driver, had missing a finger, gave that glare. I mean, never will forget this. It was like, I don't want you here.
Woodrow didn't want you there?
Oh, no. You get on the bus, and it's like, well, obviously, no kids want to sit next to you, which, by the way, was fine with me. We were instructed to sit very close to the bus driver, even though the bus driver didn't want us there. But there was no fear. I want you to understand that. There was no fear. There was no expectation either that anyone at that school, Caucasian kid or teacher, would do anything to help us. And I think to myself, it must have been extraordinarily. My mom and dad, man, I mean, I don't know if I could have done that with my bundle of joy that I love, but they saw it as a reason. They saw it purposeful. It wasn't just to integrate, go to school with the white kids, end quotes. It was to prove a point. And the point is that it was inappropriate and un-American to deny African Americans access to any school, anywhere, at any time. And that beyond a shadow of a doubt, African American kids could compete one way or the other. Period. And it wasn't proving it to the Caucasians. I want to make that very clear. It was proving it to the law. In other words, it was by law that the court said, well, okay, look, you must desegregate and you must do it with all due speed. You realize this fight had been happening like going over 10, 15 years. It started in the 1950s, bro. And, of course, Mississippi, like other states, drug their feet.
But the fight started, the intent to...
Oh, the fight actually started before then.
Now, was this fight to integrate schools?
It was to desegregate.
To desegregate.
That is correct.
Meaning to take the stipulation out that blacks could not come or were barred from coming to whatever.
That is correct.
Gotcha.
That is correct. Ultimately happened was integration, and that was something completely different. But I'm not talking about the integration, I'm talking about the mindset that we had to have and that what needs to happen now. You'll see why in a minute. At that time, it was about what was equitable and what was not. And it forced a civilized society to decide just how civilized it was. Either you're going to choose this radical side, which of course was the bigots, the Klan, the white supremacists, the rebels, or you're going to decide based upon the Constitution, which, by the way, Martin Luther King uttered often, and that when it said we the people, it didn't stipulate black people, white people, as it is now, or as it was then. And so it caused the society here in the great state of Mississippi to come face to face. Well, are we going to have a 6-year-old child, female African-American girl escorted by marshals every day? And who are we going to support here? We're going to support this radical wing that somehow or another feels that the Confederacy was right? Or we're going to finally honor the 14th Amendment and the 13th Amendment and every other amendment that came about that basically tried to make this a more perfect union, as the preamble said. But more than that, the best way to challenge it based on our parents was, in fact, to train young African-American kids to put them out front, and they did that with us. They did. I remember very vividly sitting there on Victory Street waiting for the bus for the very first time, knowing that I'm going to be the only Negro on that bus. Actually, no, I think Lewis was with me. Yeah, I think so. East Junior High. Used to pass the school on my way to 33rd. I told you the story before. I'll just end it with this. As the bus began to come down the street, you can hear the 246 say, "We don't want to integrate." By the time it got to me, it became a hush. Bus door opened. I looked back at my mama sitting on the front porch of the trailer with her arms folded. And two things hit my head. That was this. Now, I know they don't want me on this bus, and that could be frightening. But I know I better not turn around and go back to that porch. I got on that bus without one shred of fear either, by the way. And I had every expectation, ladies and gentlemen, of whatever would befall me as a young 11-year-old boy at the time. I was going to survive it. I had to survive it because if I didn't survive it, my mom would kill me. And she brought me in this world. She can take me out, and she told me that very, very well. So whatever it was that the Caucasian bigots at the time had in store, it was not nearly as bad as what those adults who sat in the KP all had instructed us. Now, when you go there, here's how it's going to be. And you were expected to go to that school and come back. Don't depend on the teacher, don't depend on the principal, and don't depend on students to look out for you. If you have to, you can call on the policeman, but don't expect for them either. That was not expectation in Rip Daniels' mind that there's somebody who's going to come, help me, save me, save me. If I ran out of lunch money or didn't have lunch money, if by chance I missed the bus, no one's going to stop and wait. There was no expectation that I was going to get free stuff. None. By the way, that was all right with me. I wasn't begging anybody for anything. I didn't even beg to go to that school. Didn't expect a makeup test. Didn't expect to play first string in football. Didn't expect, and really, I expected quite the contrary, bro. I expected for things to be thrown at me, which they were. Well, I had to learn how to throw back and not get caught. So, with that said, now you understand my mindset. The things I come here and I chat with you about, it's not like I'm looking for someone to annoy me, pat me on the head, and say, "Oh, you good old boy, you good old black boy. You all right for a Negro?"
You were good.
And don't expect for me to make decisions based upon some kind of admiration or consideration for complexion, because I don't. I just don't. That's why I put black and white in quotes, because there's no, as James Baldwin said, it's a political designation, and he's right. So with that said, going forward, there was a march yesterday in modern-day Mississippi in a wonderful little town called Ocean Springs, and I would never have thought that, actually. Well, I say I would never have thought it. I mean, right now, the population of African Americans there in Ocean Springs is maybe about 1,000, maybe 1,200, maybe 1,200. I checking my folks over at the barbecue joint to find out.
Williams Pitt over there? No,
That's not Williams Pitt. No, that's not Williams Pitt.
Excuse me, Mr. Williams.
Well, then you need to find out. I'm not going to tell you. I want you to find out. Been there forever, too. Just down the way from Reverend Trotter's church. Pleasance Barbecue. Well, it's all right. See? Pleasance Barbecue. Yes, sir, buddy. Still there. Pleasant Barbecue and tire repair. How about that?
Twofer.
So there was this march. You guys went. I'm just curious. I hate I missed it. I really wanted to go, and unfortunately, I had another appointment I had to deal with. But so, Ro. By the way, folks, for those who don't know, this is a march in this sleepy little town, an artistic town, wonderful town up until the last election, it seems.
Yeah.
So they're marching. The mayor got elected. The flag, the state flag was not flying in front of the city hall.
No.
Right?
Mayor Shea Dobson was elected. One of his first orders of business was to put the state flag up at City Hall, which drew the ire of many concerned citizens in Moss Point.
Well, you got to understand.
Ocean Springs,
and before this, there was no fight about the state flag.
Not at all.
Not there. It's not there. It wasn't one of those things that citizens were ramped up and all eager to do.
Right.
This is just a mayor at a whim wanting to show his colors.
Yeah, and right, show his bold colors,
yeah.
and make this action, drawing the outrage of Ocean Springs residents who say that the flag does not represent them whatsoever. So after some wrangling with the mayor, he decides to take it down again, but the Board of Aldermen goes and has a vote at their last meeting and issues an ordinance to put it up, to fly it, to make it mandatory that it be flown from municipal buildings in Ocean Springs. That was the reason for this protest, the OS United Against White Supremacy march and protest that took place last night. And what you just said about Ocean Springs rang true when we were in this march and subsequent protest inside of City Hall. Ocean Springs is not that huge, so the march down Government Street seemed like there were many more people than just, only about 200, 225 people there because of the closeness of everything on Government Street and Moss Point. So they marched down from Marshall Park to City Hall, a couple streets over there, and hold this protest outside of the City Hall.
Yeah. Mostly Caucasian marchers?
Mostly Caucasian marchers, yes. African Americans were represented well.
NAACP from Jackson County, Moss
Point. NAACP was on hand. President Curly Clark was there, and several members as well. Several members with the Mississippi Rising Coalition as well, who weren't Caucasian, but mostly Caucasians on both sides. And the Flaggets, Confederate flag supporters, Mississippi State flag supporters, were grossly outnumbered. You had about 200 come out in opposition to the flag, and maybe 50 at the most. And I'm talking about cumulatively. There was a group there outside the City Hall, in front of the City Hall, before the march got there, but they dispersed as soon as folks turned the corner.
Well, here's the point, folks. And this is what every city has got to ask. Is it really that important? In other words, everywhere where you have this banner, you have this kind of strife, folks. It's always been that way. Be it with George Wallace, be it with Paul B. Johnson. I mean, there's always been this strife. And by the way, it's not based on race. It really isn't. I'll tell you why. I mean, when one look at the number of people who were killed and the complexion of those people in Selma at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, mostly Caucasians were killed. Just saying. When one looks at the attack on Catholics in Mississippi and Jewish synagogue was bombed right there in Jackson. I mean, I'm just here to tell you, when you have the kind of white supremacist nationalist hate, conservative hate is what it is, then it's more about be like me. It's more about Anglo-Saxon Protestant than it is about anything else, and patriarchal. So here you have this group, and so they go there, they meet, and the question to ask for Little Ocean Springs is this how you want to be represented? Because ultimately it will get national news. I'm going to tell you that. Is this good for your business? Is this good for tourism? It certainly has not been good for Mississippi, I can tell you that. And the numbers bear it out. It just bears it out. Now, so you go to they went to City Hall, and everybody, the pros and cons, were allowed to give their spiel, right?
Yes, in front of the board and the mayor. Mayor was called into question about his motivation for doing that as one of his first orders of business, if not his very first order of business. Perhaps his loyalty to the likes of Chris McDaniel, folks who are fanning the flames of these tensions, the Breitbart group. And, he was questioned by the folks who were asking the board what was the reason for this. And, he was met with swift rebuke from several folks who were for the flag staying up.
Now, all right, I want to play some of those. Just listen at the rhetoric of those individuals who are in support of maintaining this banner. And then we're going to play the mayor asking for a vote, and also suggesting that there was a resolution for a vote. And I'm now of the opinion it's time to do the vote. Really. Statewide. We have never had one. We've never had a statewide referendum, binding referendum. But it's how the referendum's going to read is what's going to be the question. But I want to play some of these. Let's just listen at the explanations for why there are those who feel now that the banner as voted for by the aldermen should remain.
But I've never owned slaves. My family never owned slaves. That flag out there is a symbol of Southern pride. Sitting on my front porch drinking iced tea has nothing to do with black and white.
All right, stop it right there. So, sitting on your front porch drinking iced tea. So if the flag is not there in front of City Hall, you can't sit on the porch drink your iced tea?
I would say you could. I mean, there's no referendum on tea.
That's what it represents to you? I got you. But the point is so with or without it, you can still drink your iced tea. It's going to make your iced tea not going to be iced tea. It's going to turn into hot tea.
Might melt the ice.
I'm just trying to understand. So that's what it represents to you. Got you. But there is a representation, as indicated, ladies and gentlemen, by the legislature that chose it. I mean, the red, white, the blue, the battle flag in the canton, I mean, they did have an explanation as to why they chose it. So there is a definition of it. Not that she would even know. Play another one.
Hello, thank you for allowing me to speak up here for just a minute. My name is Michael Young, and I just wanted to make a few comments about the flag. All I have to say is this. I have never really considered myself a hateful person or a racist person. I have never supported racism, and I certainly do not support slavery or these white supremacist groups. However, what I wanted to say is very simple. When Mao Zedong in China engaged in the communist revolution there, he destroyed all the traditional cultural symbols of the Chinese people. He destroyed their statues. He banned the flying of the traditional Qing Empire's flag. And any other cultural symbols which represented the history of China were ordered to be destroyed. The people of Mississippi should come to realize that the flag, regardless of what some people may ascribe to it, is the history of the state. And replacing the flag with some artificial symbol that's been cooked up only a few years ago can simply never represent true history of our state. That is all I'd like to say.
Well, that's enough. So we equated Mao Zedong and China with Mississippi. Boy, that's a big stretch.
Huge.
The reality is, ladies and gentlemen, that the first banner that the state had actually was the Mississippi Magnolia banner that one Billy Hughes in Gulfport is now flying. It wasn't until 1894 that the current unofficial banner was chosen by the legislature. Now, let me make this very, very clear. It represents what it represents. It is a battle regalia. It is. Developed by one Beauregard, General Beauregard during the Civil War. It represents battle. That's what it represents. The actual canton of the Mississippi state flag. It is not a friendly symbol. And it has done very little to put forward any kind of welcoming representation of this state. The state has been known as the Magnolia State, not the Confederate State, although there are those who wanted to be known as that. It was a contradiction, is what I'm saying, sir. And as far as removing banners and going back to Mao Zedong, that's a completely different situation. They had communism in China. That was the whole reason for it. Both communism and alleviating any kind of religious beliefs. That was a long stretch from here. These are the United States of all people. And there's a protection of religion here. You're not communistic. Now, if he's suggesting that somehow or another we should maintain it, then you're acting exactly like the fascists who came up with the Confederacy, because that was a fascist society. You do understand that there were no symbols to represent all people in the Confederacy. As per their constitution, it was designed only for white peoples. And we'll be back.
The Jackson Advocate newspaper has been the voice of black Mississippians since 1938. The Jackson